Good evening, everybody. My name is Drew Raessler, and I'm the Director of Cobb Department of Transportation. Before I get into the slides, want to talk a little bit about why we're here tonight. And you see here, it says Cobb County Mobility SPLOST, and really want to focus in on that word mobility. So we're going to talk about a lot of the plans that we've been working on, scenarios, potential funding opportunities, but really, before we do any of that, wanted to talk very briefly about mobility. And it's something that we all depend on. We depend on it to get to meetings like this, to get to work, to school, to entertainment, to shopping, whether we use it or we rely on freight to be able to get our packages to us. It's something that's so foundational to our community, and it's something that we oftentimes just take for granted what needs to be done in the future. So we look at, and again, we'll talk about the transportation plans, but we're a community of about 750,000 here in Cobb County, projected to grow to 1 million. And so with that growth comes a lot of opportunity, of course, but also a lot of responsibility in terms of what needs are there, what demands does that place on the transportation network. And so really what this exercise in planning and looking at funding opportunities is really trying to answer. The question that we're trying to answer is, what are those mobility needs over the next 30 years? And then what tools and strategies do we need to be doing right now to be prepared for that? Because we know that it takes, we can't just imagine a transportation project, a new interchange, a new connection, and it just be there. It's something that we have to have foresight on, have to plan, have to design, and then have to build. So that with the table set, we'll jump in to the conversation today. So today we'll talk about from planning into funding, just looking at what the process is when it comes to transportation. A lot of times the first that we see driving around of a transportation project is the orange barrels and the congestion and the delay. So we're here to talk about how those projects come to be a project at all, as well as the scenarios that we've got here in the back of the room, and then to talk about specifically the schedule there. So from planning to funding. So what you see here is a slide about the Comprehensive Transportation Plan. So the Comprehensive Transportation Plan is required by the Atlanta Regional Commission on a 5-year recurrence. So every 5 years, each of the counties in the Metro Atlanta region put together a transportation plan where they look at what the transportation needs and demands are over the next 30 years, and then designs a plan and prioritizes projects and strategies based on where the growth in jobs, where the growth in residents, what's going on with the county. And so to develop that plan, it looks at those previous plans, at what can be kept from those previous plans, what new data is available either through a census or other means, and then speaks with the public. So this has been the development of the Comprehensive Transportation Plan is the most recent version is nearing completion this year. And it's been a long process. It's a process that's gone through the pandemic. We know the pandemic has had changes to transportation, desires and expectations. The quantification of that has been challenging, but it's something that we've attempted to wrap our arms around. And you see here the overall schedule. So it's gone from, again, determining what is in terms of how the transportation system as a whole is performing, where it will go, and then what we need to be doing to prepare for that. So once we go through this process of identifying those the demands on the system, we did a lot of public input over the last couple of years determining what the priorities of the public are. And so we had a number of meetings throughout the community and came up with some guiding principles that we use to filter projects through. Then we determined projects and we fit them into roughly three different categories. So first we have surface transportation, and these are everything from roadway capacity widening type projects to intersection improvements like roundabouts or turn lanes, to things that are more active transportation. So think going out and enjoying your community that you live in, sidewalks and trails and projects like that. So that's surface transportation. And then the next component that we looked at was transit. So this is everything from local transit service, including paratransit that comes along with that, all the way to more high capacity options available as well. And then a bucket that we spent a lot of time naming that we called other. And these are more unmappable projects, I think asset management. So we have 5 major assets that we need to be able to maintain in our transportation network, and that would be bridges, asphalt, drainage, traffic signals, and signs and marking. And so this looks at the funding for those, as well as some of the more comprehensive categories like transportation technology, making sure our signal systems are the most advanced so that we can fit as much capacity through our network as is possible. And then once we come through and filter the projects through the community priorities, then we need to filter through different funding opportunities. And generally, from a local standpoint, there's a lot of state and federal opportunities out there that we'd be glad to discuss. But from a local standpoint, there's generally 3 different options for funding transportation improvements and asset capital maintenance. And that's the countywide general SPLOST. So speaking about that, the Cobb County's countywide general SPLOST was just renewed a year ago, today or this week, and that will begin collections in January. That is a 6-year program and is split between the unincorporated Cobb County, and then 26% goes to the cities. Within the transportation portion of that for the county, about 70 to 80% is for what we call asset maintenance, capital maintenance items. So there's a significant amount of funding that's going towards resurfacing, bridge replacements, drainage infrastructure. Those are the big 3 that were funded out of that general SPLOST. There was very little that went towards capacity, safety, kind of anything new. It was more about replacing and maintaining that which we already have, and less about expanding the capacity on the network or creating new connections for transit or otherwise. There's the general fund. Right now, the general fund funds the operations of the Department of Transportation, so that funds all of the staff that's out there filling potholes and fixing broken curb and catch basins and replacing drainage infrastructure. But it has very, very little in the way of any capital improvement projects. And then we move to the potential funding sources. And so there are 2 legislative options that have been made available by the state over the last 10 years or so. And the first is House Bill 170. This allows for up to 5 years and up to 1%. It can be incremental in any of those, so it can be for less time or for less percentages, but can be up to 5 years, and again, up to 1%, and it can only be used on capital. Anything transportation, but only transportation capital. So this can be anything from roadways to airports to transit to any capital improvement transportation project. And again, that would be above the sales tax that the county currently has. This is in addition to the general sales tax. The other option is House Bill 930. So again, it's up to 1%, can be incremental in a percentage less than that, but up to 1%, but up to now 30 years. So 30 years, much longer than 5 years. And this is the more recent of the bills that was passed in 2019. And the reason that longer time frame was allowed by the state is because in order to be competitive for transit funding from the Federal Transit Authority, really need to be able to demonstrate that there's a reliable source of operational funding to support that. And so the 30-year time frame allows for transit operations to also be considered and to have that longer term time frame available so that it can be sustained over the life of that project. The FTA wants to make sure that if they assist the county on a transit connection, that connection is sustainable in the long term and is not just a short-term project. So then with that, and this is where we really move from the planning into the funding. So trying to understand what would be possible in those two funding options, we generated 3 scenarios in each, and we will walk through those. I know it's a lot of information, so feel free. I'm glad to be interrupted. I've got 3 little ones at home, so I'm often interrupted. So feel free to raise your hand as we go along to make sure we get your questions. But within the 170, we did a quarter penny, half penny, and full penny scenario. This was really to demonstrate how far a dollar stretches with a transportation project. If we were to start talking about what kind of revenue comes in, it's difficult to translate the revenue into specific projects. So this allowed us to demonstrate how far a dollar could stretch for transportation projects. And then on the other side, on transit, we did 3 different scenarios. And those were a balance, a coverage, and a productivity. All 3 were for the full penny and for the full 30 years. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get there. So surface transportation, this is a very fancy, pretty graphic that basically says the more funding, the more opportunity there is for larger projects. And so what that means is as we move towards the full penny scenario for the 5-year option, it allows for bigger projects. Think widenings, new alignment roadways, realignments, big grade separations, projects that are of a much larger magnitude than a kind of a typical intersection improvement. As that funding moves more towards a quarter penny, it really needed to be more allocated towards targeted projects and specific pinch points, so they could be more intersection operational and safety type projects, just because of where the funding is and how much those larger projects cost. So for the first scenario, again, this is for the full penny and the full 5 years to demonstrate what would be possible there. To orient you, the first table shows those more component level, where we would set aside funding for the cities. That's not on the next maps that you'll see. We would ask the cities for those projects. So right now we're in the city of Marietta. We would ask the city of Marietta to allocate their projects. Sidewalks, so we know sidewalks is a desire. We typically determine those sidewalks on a year-to-year basis based on community input and in working with the district commissioners. And then traffic management, technology, and planning, these are more overarching county-wide investments that aren't specifically mappable like the projects in the bottom. The bottom projects show trails, roadway capacity, so this is again the widening type projects, new roadway connections, and then operational improvements. And so what these 2 maps and the tables show is a 30-70 split. So this would be 30% towards what we call active transportation. So one of the things that we did see through the pandemic is there was a greater desire as people were working from home to be able to enjoy the communities where they lived. And so what this shows is being able to expand trails throughout the county so that folks can go out, enjoy their community, and commute to or get around their community, not just in a vehicle. And then 70% towards roadway projects. And so a couple, I won't go through all of these, but the yellow again are more intersection improvements. Purple would be corridor enhancements. And then the red and the orange are the bigger projects. I'll point out a few of those. The red one you see here is East-West Connector in an assumed widening project. Up top would be Roswell Road. To the northwest would be Cobb Parkway at McCollum. At that intersection, we have a big Z movement where traffic's coming from McCollum, then going up Cobb Parkway, and then Kennesaw due west, and then the reverse. So looking at some of that east-west connectivity, and then various intersection projects throughout the county. With a half penny, again, determining how far a dollar stretches. So as you would expect, half of the revenue. So from 36 down to 16 trail projects throughout the county. And then less of those red widening projects that are the higher dollar projects and more just intersection operational improvement. It still has that Cobb Parkway at McCollum project, but all the other widenings have fallen off. Quarter penny, half of the half a penny scenario in the funding. And you see here from 16 down to 9 trail projects. and then fewer operational and safety projects throughout the county, but again, identifying them based on priorities of where there are crash problems, where there are congestion and pinch points throughout the county. And then you see here a comparison between those three scenarios. So then transit. And before we get into transit, we did want to define a little bit more about what our various acronyms are at DOT. We really like our acronyms, so we'll define a few of those. The first one is heavy transit, heavy rail transit, HRT, and this would be an extension of the MARTA rail network. So this is heavy rail. Bus rapid transit, BRT, would be train-like vehicles that are rubber tired in a dedicated lane. So they operate much like light rail, but they're on rubber tires, rubber-tired vehicles, again, in a dedicated space. Arterial rapid transit, so this is a hybrid model where there are some areas where they're operating in dedicated space, but then other areas where they're sharing lanes with vehicles. And then the local bus system, the rapid bus system, this is inclusive of the transit system we have today. We have these modes today. The commuter bus system, so think park and rides down into Atlanta. And then the on-demand service, this would be the flex, and more determining and calling for a ride and then being picked up by the flex system. So the three scenarios, I mentioned these three scenarios, and generally with transit, there are two levers that we can pull. So first lever we can pull is coverage. So we can expand transit and have it cover the maximum amount of area throughout the county, but that comes at the expense of productivity. So the more area that we cover, the less we can do with the bus rapid transit, the heavy rail, those projects that will get you from A to B the quickest. The more we move, the other lever is productivity. So the more we pull on the productivity lever in thinking heavy rail or other kind of larger, more expensive, but faster A to B type projects, the less we're able to cover the entire county. And then somewhere in between, we called it balanced. And so we tried to find where might we find a balance of those two scenarios. So the first scenario that we'll present here today is the balanced scenario. And so what this allows is good support for those most dense areas of the county with a BRT system. And so again, BRT would be a train-like vehicle in a dedicated space along these red corridors. So look at the red, that's the highest capacity that's being proposed here. And so you see some critical east-west connections, and that would be across 285. That would take advantage of the express lanes that GDOT is building today, as well as kind of an outer ring of that from H.E. Holmes down there in the just past South Cobb into Fulton County, the westernmost connection on MARTA, all the way through up to the T that you see there. That would be the Austell east-west connector area, what we're calling Hospital Triangle, right there by the Wellstar Hospital, up Austell Road and into the Marietta Transfer Center, not too far from where we are right now, as well as connections along the Northwest Corridor. When we look at the Northwest Corridor, it's really the spine of the county. We have 4 of our 6 cities. We have all 3 of our community improvement districts. That's really the business centers of the county are along that corridor. So this connects that corridor from the town center area all the way down to Cumberland and then beyond towards Atlanta. Again, in very high frequency, high productivity, think short times between A and B, very quick transit service. And then stepping down from that would be our rapid and arterial rapid transit systems that would connect from Marietta over towards North Fulton and into the MARTA system on 400. And then the green would be the local system that serves as support to that larger high capacity system. So a lot of numbers that on this page. I won't go through all of those, but the one I did want to point out is if we were to look at adding specifically the employment in 2050, looking at both the local and the high capacity non-rail that's being proposed in this scenario, we're looking at 73% of jobs being within a quarter-mile walking distance of transit. And so what that means is we have such a challenge right now with workforce and being able to attract folks to come work, this would make sure that the vast majority of jobs are within a quarter mile, within walking distance of transit. And you see there good coverage in terms of just overall population, as well as the more disadvantaged with the balance scenario, particularly compared to the existing service. Won't go through all of these numbers other than to say one of the things that we are looking at is city set-aside, so we're coordinating with the cities. This is proposed to be a Cobb County service because we have a transit operator within the county, but we would coordinate with the cities to identify shelter improvements, last mile connectivity improvements in their cities, as well as making sure that we set aside funds for the latest and greatest in terms of transit technology to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. From there, we move into the coverage scenario. Now that I've oriented you on some of the colors here, we won't spend quite as much time, but did want to share these other scenarios. So you see here the green extends to much more of the county. This is local bus service. The one thing I will point out that's not on the map is the 15-minute frequency. So right now, our frequency on bus service is in the 30 to 60-minute time frame. This brings it to a 15-minute headways, so much more frequent, much more reliable service. Also, the other thing that's obvious about this is there's fewer of those bus rapid transit and arterial rapid transit connections. So you see here still some good coverage in terms of population and employment, though not quite as much as that balance scenario. More of it flexes towards the local route system. A lot of those same set-asides for technology and the cities is still available with this funding option. And then finally, we recognize that one of the questions, anytime we bring up transit, will be, well, what about rail? So just by way of comparison, rail is on the order of magnitude about $300 million a mile compared to bus rapid transit of $30 million a mile. So it's a pretty significant price difference between those two. And as we went through the comprehensive transportation plan, what we found was the highest rated rail connection into the MARTA system was Cumberland into the MARTA system. And so what you have here is that blue with the cross-hatching would be a rail connection, what that would look like from Cumberland into the Bankhead station. Again, this is intended to be illustrative of how far a dollar stretches in terms of the revenue that would be collected over that 30-year time frame. And so you see here with that rail connection, which would be fantastic for the Cumberland area, the remaining transit coverage throughout the rest of the county is not quite as robust as those other scenarios. Remember those two levers of coverage, covering most of the county, and productivity, covering a smaller amount of the county, but with higher productivity, faster A to B type service. And then you see here the numbers between the two, where the local route stays in the 30 to 40%, the high capacity route, those folks, those jobs, the population, the disadvantaged population that's within a quarter mile of the transit system is not what it is in those other two scenarios. And then you see here a cost breakdown of those projects. Again, this is online. This scenario did not allow for city set-asides, just given the cost of that heavy rail connection. And then you see here a comparison of the three scenarios. The other thing that I did not point out is the pink hazy area. This would be on-demand transit service. So the specifics of that are currently being worked out. We do have an on-demand service area. It would be an expansion of that. Right now, that service is flex. We're looking at ways to enhance that service, and so we're walking through the state of the practice right now to determine what other areas have done that's been successful in that, and that would be something that we would look, should one of these options be pursued by the board, that we would look to present more information on to the public. And then you see here a summary of those performance measures and specifics of the city set-aside. And then finally, the schedule. So we started with a lot of our stakeholders. So we've had this same conversation with our cities, with our community improvement districts in Cumberland, Town Center, and Gateway, as well as some of the key stakeholders throughout the community. And then really the most important of this outreach is what we're doing today in talking to you all about these specific scenarios, what's been done, how this might relate to you. So encourage you to take a look at the maps in the back. We'll hang around and answer any questions that you have. And of course, I'll take some questions from the group. We've got these town halls. We've got a survey, cobbmsplost.org. Again, that's cobbmsplost.org. It's up on your page there. That's probably the best way to take the survey. We will take those results. That survey will close on December 1st and provide that information to the board and look for the board's direction on which package they would like us to refine, how they see the question of mobility, kind of back to where we started. And this is my final slide. So back to where we started, where we know that there's population growth coming to Cobb County, and we know there's going to be transportation needs coming off of that. So the question is, what mechanism answers that question the best? How can we serve the needs of the community so that we continue to have success in the county? What we know is when roadways get to capacity, this is just from traffic modeling, when a roadway is at capacity, just 10% more traffic can double those delays. And so what's important through all of this is identifying where that traffic is coming from, where it will be, and then what strategies we can put out there to make sure that we are addressing those needs and continuing on the success that Cobb County has enjoyed for these years. So that is my last slide, and open it up to what questions you all have. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your good work on this. For me personally, the balance scenario seems like the best choice, but my concerns in reading about, the MSPLOST and so on, is that it seems like we're dealing with things at maybe the wrong level, so to speak. To me, the Atlanta area reminds me a lot of Washington, D.C. There's this beltway around there, and then people are going in all different directions. They're not people in Washington are working in Virginia, but living in Maryland, and so on and so forth. And same thing here. We've got people going all over the place. Some, live in Cobb and work in Cobb, but an awful lot, myself included, spent most of our careers living in Cobb and working somewhere else, and in multiple locations. And I've worked in Gwinnett, and I've worked in Fulton, I've worked in DeKalb, and I've worked in Cobb. So I don't see any of these solutions that would have helped me. There are things like, they just seem like they're very much contained within specific routes within Cobb County, and so at the macro level, they're not really helping very much. And then at the micro level, I think they're also falling short because how do I get to one of these locations? So in my neighborhood where I live, I would have to go over a mile just to get to, a major road, basically, to get out of my neighborhood. And I don't think that's so unusual. So then we end up having to drive somewhere to get into one of these, locations. I think, if we thought along the lines of your on-demand kind of solutions or some of those, if we had things that were more like microbuses or something that were circulating or could be called on demand and then take you to a place and route you to something in Gwinnett or wherever you worked, or Cobb or whatever. I mean, that seems to be the solution. Otherwise, you're jamming the roads just getting to the station, basically.
Absolutely. So I've been tasked with summarizing questions, and I won't fully attempt that because we are recording to make sure this gets on the website. But I think the question is how is this useful for me? Because I think ultimately that's the lens that folks will look at this through, is what does this mean for me? And a lot of great points, but looking at to where you ended of the microtransit, how do I get from where I live into the broader system? I think is a great point. And it's one that we've looked at with those microtransit areas, and looking at how folks can serve, as well as making sure that we have good sidewalk connectivity, trail connectivity to those routes. But it's a point well made that we've got to make sure that whatever system is built is competitive from a time standpoint, because we know I just like you, just like all of us, will take the path of least resistance to get from A to B. And so what does that look like, and how does all of that fit together?
You know, I know with the SPLOST, the extension of existing, which I think was an easier, you're not increase. And now that it's an increase, an additional whatever you decide to go with. But of the 5-year, those projects, intersection improvements to trails, which y'all have been doing a great job, especially all the trails. It would seem that those would be better if you just added those maybe to the future. And because I know regionally, our sister cities are looking into expanding, not MARTA obviously because of the expense, but with the GDOT, with all their lanes coming across 285 and them talking with the BRT, it would seem to make sense if we just build our system to connect into what the rest of the region is doing, so it would be a coordinated system, and we wouldn't be left at the end of the runway, no pun intended, when these things are built, because I know GDOT is looking to build the 285 going across eventually with the lanes, the managed lanes at 400. And, if we had something in Cobb County, I know these Lexus lanes have really worked out well, but something I think for my kids would be appreciated, something a little bit more diversity in terms of transportation options if we're looking, long-term beyond 5 years, because I know you're right, these transportation projects, especially the big ones, do cost a lot. And heavy rail, I would agree, will cost way too much and only give us to what? Cumberland, I think you've said in the past. It wouldn't really benefit the region as a whole, the county as a whole.
Relative to talking about what the region's doing with 285, and I appreciate you mentioning that, because it is part of a larger project, is GDOT is really looking across 285 to expand the express lanes. So we've seen great success with the Northwest Corridor and the express lanes that were put on 75 and 575. GDOT is expanding on that, and their model is really where they add capacity, they're going to do it under the umbrella of express lanes to allow them to be able to build these projects faster, to be able to fit the funding within the project itself. And so they are building express lanes on 285. They're looking at 2 lanes either direction throughout the portion in Cobb County. Doesn't go quite all the way to Interstate 20, but this project in the red and then the dashed red you see here would be what the GDOT commissioner has called express lane transit. So it builds stations along that 285 corridor to be able to connect from, say, the Cumberland area over to the perimeter area, or from that section all the way down into HE Homes to get to the larger MARTA. So capitalizing on the regional efforts that are going on there. Yes, ma'am.
I'm getting a question about human safety. It's very interesting.
So the question is, why do we need this? So something we talked about kind of at the beginning is right now, Cobb County, we're a community of 750,000. We're expected to grow over the next 30 years to a community of 1 million. We know there are already transportation challenges throughout the community. There are corridors, there are intersections that are at capacity. And what we know from traffic modeling and experience is that roadways that are at capacity, when we add even sometimes just 10% more volume to a roadway network that's already at capacity, we can double those delays. And so it's really looking at understanding where that growth is and being prepared for it, and what transportation projects are needed to make sure that folks can still move around the county at large. Yes, sir.
So how much consideration is given to emerging technologies like autonomous driving and that kind of stuff that is just by itself going to reduce congestion significantly? And also, what kind of consideration are we making to other like micro-mobility solutions such as electric bicycles, scooters, motorcycles, all of which are coming out electrically in really big numbers here lately? Are we taking any of that into consideration, or are we just figuring that we're going to continue to drive cars forever?
So I love the question. I was hoping someone would ask the technology question, because we could spend a whole town hall talking about transportation technology. Generally within transportation technology, there's three distinct and independent things that are all coming to a head with the technology now. We have autonomous vehicles. That's probably the furthest out of the three. The challenge is when you get into more of a roadway network and you're dealing with pedestrians, there's a lot of technology and kind of litigation, legal risk challenges with that, but it's coming. The technology is there and will be there pretty quickly. We have connected vehicles. So this is where right now you're driving down the road, your only connection to the transportation system is seeing red, yellow, green. What is actually being rolled out right now is the next fleet of vehicles, and even some of the vehicles that we've retrofitted will be able to communicate with the transportation network. Where you, for an individual vehicle, you might be driving down Cobb Parkway and it'll tell you hit 32 miles an hour to hit the green band. So you hit green all the way through based on those timings and figuring out what's going on there. It's also got use for transit priority and emergency vehicle preemption that we're using currently to make sure that emergency vehicles can have faster response times. And then finally, the third effort, and I promise I'll get back to your question about how we're considering this here, is the electrification of the system. That's also taking place. So, and that has demands not just on the system, but also how the system is funded. When we look at gas tax being more of a user fee traditionally, as the electrification of the fleet, how does that all shake out in terms of the funding? So all three of those are going on simultaneously. And then to the comment about congestion, I would respectfully disagree that autonomous vehicles would reduce congestion. And the reason for that is, if you look at some of the idea of the technology, it may be where your refrigerator is connected to your grocery store. And your refrigerator says, we are low on milk, orange juice, and yogurt. And so you push a button and the grocery store sends a vehicle with those packages to you. Well, now instead of it being a trip on your way home from work, it's two trips, one from the grocery store to you and then from you back to the grocery store. And the occupancy of those vehicles is less than one, it's zero. So we're driving down the number of people in a vehicle at a time. We're actually adding, in that scenario, would be adding more vehicles to the roadway. Another scenario would be parking's very expensive downtown. Perhaps you ride down in your autonomous vehicle, tell it to go park at home because it's a reverse commute. Well, now it's a trip to work, back to your home, and then to come get you, and then to take you back home. So now a trip that was 2 trips is now 4 trips. And so all of that to say, as part of our transportation, our comprehensive transportation plan, smart cities was a big piece of that, how we can prepare for that. And the way that we're doing that currently is making sure that we have a robust fiber network to make sure we have really, really solid connections with our assets in the field so that we can make sure they're making the best decisions. And we saw it just last week at the parade where we had very unusual traffic patterns coming to the Cumberland area from all over the region. And we were able to manage that automatically with our traffic signal system that's connected. So it's part of it's a big question, what happens with technology. I do believe, to your other point about microtransit, that is a portion of where we anticipate this to be, and that's some of what's contemplated in the future with microtransit and some of the technology set-asides to make sure that we're taking advantage of that. Yes, sir?
You call this a balanced scenario, but I look at this map and I look up, getting the Alpharetta, the northwest and all, I mean, it's pretty empty. There's pretty sparse areas up in there. And, with what we're seeing in the trends is a lot of people are starting to rethink living, in the downtown, and a lot of companies are starting to think about not being located downtown. I mean, this is like we're building the transportation system of the past, and it also looks to me like it's a huge payoff for the Cumberland CID. I mean, they're getting all the density of this transportation in that sector right there. This isn't, to me, balanced. This isn't moving us to Alpharetta. This isn't moving us where the growth is going to be north. And this isn't the transportation system of the future. This is the transportation system of the past. And there's a lot of nice to have things in this, not nice wants and things, but we can't even pay for the infrastructure we have now. We can't keep up the things we've got now, let alone, fund things that we don't actually need compared to things we have to have.
Maybe the question that was not specifically asked, what about the areas that don't have the direct connections? There's some areas that have more on this particular map than other areas. So what does that mean for Cobb County? Well, two things. One is to put together a successful transit system, it needs to be transit supportive. So it needs to be those areas where, to what we talked about at the very first question, that folks will use it, that it's useful for them, and that it's productive in getting from A to B for them. So it needs to be in those areas that have the density to support it. And so that's the first thing, why it looks the way it does. And then the second is what that allows is the connections of transit in areas with density allows for that growth to be in those areas, the continued growth to be in those areas. So it's supportive of keeping that density where there is currently density so that it doesn't put quite as much development pressure on those areas that are more low density, a little bit more suburban, even in some areas out towards West Cobb, more rural settings, and allows for that growth to take place in the areas where there is transit. Yes, sir.
I get a little nervous on the 30-year SPLOST because, and 3 or 4 of the comments prior to mine indicated, the changing environment, and 2 things that have further exacerbated that are things coming out of the pandemic, and that is, telework plus people who are, the whole employment mindset is taking a shift. And, I understand looking out there and saying, okay, we have to do things and coming up with a 5-year plan, but there's 2 things that bother me about the 30-year plan, and that is, number 1, how much do we really know right now about transportation of the future, and including numbers, and then number 2, there is that whole thing called government accountability. And once this 30-year SPLOST gets voted in, we're stuck with it no matter which direction it takes us. So my questions are, what have you done data-wise as far as, the changing demographics? And number 2, on the second one, accountability for a SPLOST that we vote on next year, 20 years down the road.
Sure.
So to the first question, that was where we spent the time at the beginning of the presentation in the comprehensive transportation plan, where we looked at the demographics and the population and the employment where it is today and where that's expected to be. So that all of those maps were analyzed and evaluated for based on the future land use plan, where the growth patterns are happening today, to look at what the transportation needs are. So that's baked into these specific.
How recently was that done? Because, one of the things in my head is the pandemic has made some changes to that environment.
Absolutely. So this plan is not yet completed. It'll be finished by the end of this year. And so we have looked to take that into account. We have seen traffic volumes come back very close to where they were pre-pandemic just in the last few months. But it's a great point about how the pandemic has affected every aspect of life. To the second question, in accountability, one of the reasons I think SPLOST are great is because they give us very specific projects to deliver. And so we know that with any SPLOST program, a 5-year to however long, that our task is to deliver just the projects that are in the book. And so our accountability comes in, every contract that we award goes to the Board of Commissioners. It's reviewed by the SPLOST Citizen Oversight Committee. And it's made very public on our website as to where the dollars are being spent. And so it is something that we do take very, very important to what we do. I'll say the challenge with a 30-year program, because I certainly understand where you're coming from there, is the balance between specificity and flexibility. We want to be as specific as we possibly can so that you all as voters, as Cobb County residents, I'm a Cobb County resident, so as I talk about this with my wife who's a voter, be very specific to say over the 30 years, here's what we anticipate that we're able to deliver. However, we build in the flexibility to be able to adjust to the emerging technology needs that's still within the umbrella of what we've identified here, but is flexible enough to meet the demands of opportunities either through technology or the specifics of where things are going. And that's something that would very carefully need to be considered in any package that comes before the voters.
So did I read right that this potentially is 2 cents stacked on top of the current sales tax in the county?
Yes.
And that, how does that kind of compare to the counties directly surrounding us, sort of in the worst case scenario, if the 2 cents gets approved? And then if it doesn't get approved, what does that mean for all of these projects, and will we see a millage rate increase instead?
So just by way of background, and many of you already know this, so I apologize, Cobb County currently has a 6% sales tax. 4% comes off the top, it goes to the state to fund the various state departments and agencies that are determined out of Atlanta. So the 2 remaining percent sales tax, one goes to the school districts, Cobb School District and Marietta School District, split based on population. That was just approved last week, and will continue. I don't have the specific dates, but through the later part of the decade. And then we have the general SPLOST is the other. That's the county-wide SPLOST that we talked about in the beginning. And that split approximately 74% to the county, 26% to the cities. And it funds everything from transportation projects like resurfacing, bridge replacements, things like that, to bridges. The building you're in now was just renovated using SPLOST funds to projects within the cities. So that's the 6% that is today. Looking at surrounding counties, Cherokee County has 6% sales tax. Gwinnett County has 6% sales tax. There's one other, I think, in Northwest somewhere, but all of the other counties, all of the other 159, so 155 counties have higher than a 6% sales tax, and it's through various mechanisms. There's a lot of different options, but generally throughout the Metro Atlanta region, we are the lowest with Cherokee and Gwinnett. When we look towards Fulton and DeKalb, they're getting up towards 8 and 9%, depending City of Atlanta and some of the other things going on. So to Cobb County, though, because that's what we're here to talk about. So the 6% is there. House Bill 170 can be up to 1%. House Bill 930 can be up to 1%. They are separate. So the maximum, if both options were pursued, is 8%. With that said, I do not anticipate, and this does get a little bit into what I anticipate in some of the conversations with the board, I do not anticipate both referendums to come at full pennies before the voters. And we're talking about November of 22, specifically to this. I do anticipate that it's one or the other, just because of the challenges of communicating the specifics of what's in either one of them. What I'll say is with 170, if that were the path pursued, that's, remember, the 5-year program, it can only be for 5 years, and it can only be for transportation capital. So then that leaves out any of the longer-term transit projects. If the 930 is the one that's pursued, remember that's the 30-year program, that would leave out anything that's not directly related to transit. So in terms of what that means for the community, it's really a decision at that point of how are those intersection capacity or transit projects funded? Is that a priority? How would you like to see those funded? And honestly, that's what we're here tonight to hear from you all through this forum, and then also through the website. Again, that's cobbmsplost.org. Yes, ma'am?
Okay, so let's be honest here. Bill 930 is the bill that if we pass that, everybody, those funds are going to MARTA, and they're controlled by the regional, and we don't get control of those. They tell us what we need to do. Now,
So I'm sorry, can I just I really do apologize, but can I just address that part? I want to make sure you.
Isn't that the one that Gwinnett, 2 years ago shot down?
So there's a lot of different transit options available by state law, and there is the MARTA Act. There's another constitutional act related to that. This is what we're talking about tonight. Is House Bill 930 that was passed in 2019. It would allow for those funds to be collected by Cobb County and expended by Cobb County within Cobb County using Cobb County's transit operator. What is required by law is that those projects are approved not by MARTA, but by the Atlanta Transit Link Authority, which determines an Atlanta Regional Transit Plan. And basically, whatever referendum comes before the voters, those projects have to be on, and that group is called the ATL. It's a state-run organization, again, that sits between all of the transit operators, Cobb County, MARTA. It sits between us and the Federal Transit Authority. So it is a regional authority that does planning, and so any project that comes before the voters for funding that goes back into Cobb County has to be approved by that. So I'm sorry, I did want to clarify.
Okay, so the intent is heavy rail or light heavy rail or combination. Okay, that was the original intent on it. So, and it's basically the Atlanta region which is controlling it. And we have to ask them for the funds to do whatever here. So, so go back to 170, which is the 5-year, which we have options of up to a penny, that we can do all of the other things. Why do we think that we need more buses or heavy rail or any of this anyway? Why do we not just go with something like Bill 170 where we can have same thing, combination, and maybe try to fix some things using better technology, using call-up transportation for people who are way out in the further ends of the pink areas, and they're not being addressed right now. Because there are transit right now in these main corridors that you have up there.
Sure. So a couple points, and then to answer your questions. The first, again, the funds would have to be on the Atlanta Regional Transit Plan. But again, that's for the Cobb County voters to decide whether or not they choose to support those. It would be operated by CobbLink, Cobb's transit provider. So why transit? Well, what we're seeing is you all have seen what has been going on with the real estate market. The cost of land is getting exponentially more and more expensive. It's getting more and more difficult to widen those congested corridors. So as we look at the growth, as we look at adding 30% more population to the county, transit being a part of that is a necessity to make sure that we're able to support the county and the mobility needs within the county. As far as what happens with this specific referendum, that's really, again, what we're here tonight. Again, I'll keep mentioning the website, cobbmsplost.org, and encourage you to take those surveys, share out those surveys to make sure that you do have the opportunity to say, I think that this specific bill fits more the desires of the community or the other, or what it is that we're missing. To make sure I get folks that haven't asked.
Our community has been on the short end of the stick from a prioritization with SPLOST. Is there a project list? Is there a system for prioritizing projects? And is there a measurement system so that we can grade our elected officials on their ability to hit those priorities? Because that's missing in the SPLOST.
Is it these projects or SPLOST?
Any SPLOST. I mean, I've asked for SPLOST audits, and the way the SPLOST audit comes back from the Department of Revenue is they randomly pick some money that's spent and, it was spent on that project, so it's good. But there's no clear priority system. Hey, these are projects that need to be done first. These are communities that need service, they're in need. How will the measurement on the back end be so that we can grade the performance of this proposal?
To answer that question, I'll talk not about these, but about the general SPLOST. And I know we're talking about a lot, so follow me here. But the general SPLOST that will begin collections in January. So we're going through a process right now to meet with the Board of Commissioners to to identify which projects are the priorities and to schedule out specifically the first year, but to identify the projects throughout the entire county so that we can begin that process. And then the accountability for that is both to the board as well as to the SPLOST Citizen Oversight Committee. That same process would happen here should any referendum pass, where we walk through a process to identify with the district commissioners and the chairwoman to identify which projects are the priorities, and then to work through those priorities in coordination with the desires of the public.
Yes, so the second part of my question was, if the referendum fails, what happens to all these projects? Is it sort of full steam ahead and, we'll see a millage rate increase, or they just disappear, or, what are the thoughts along that?
Sure. So I can only speak to historically. Historically, over the last 30 years, so I'm sorry, the question for the video is oh, you were close enough. I'm getting a thumbs up. I'm sorry. Historically, over the last 30 years, transportation capital projects have been funded out of SPLOST because the general fund has so many demands on it. When you look at half of the employees in the county are public safety, police, fire, and sheriff. That's a significant portion of the county's general fund budget. So just given all of that's on the general fund budget, historically, transportation capital projects have not been part of that because they are so expensive. And so the model that Cobb County has chosen to move forward with is to go through SPLOST referendums. Because again, what it does to our some of the comments about accountability, it says, here is a project list. You, the voters, what say you about this specific project list? And then we are tied back to that in our delivery. I have no reason to believe that model wouldn't continue, but that's really a question ultimately for the Board of Commissioners.
Can you go into a little bit about what we learned from the previous surveys and stuff that we learned about what people are looking for to get around, how they're looking to get around regionally, how there are, like, what type of workers are still requiring transit, such as the essential workers and the service workers, and stuff like that, because I think that, I think some of those people's stories are kind of underrepresented and not heard as well as I think they should be. So I know that we've done some surveys that kind of spoken to some of those needs.
Sure. So speaking of the surveys, with coming out of the comprehensive transportation plan, what we found, and Laura, correct me on the numbers, I believe the numbers were 71% of the county wanted more investment into transit. And the other thing that we found coming out of the pandemic was a desire to do more what we call active transportation, in addition to transit, of trails and sidewalks, to be able to, you live somewhere, you work now from that place, to be able to get out and enjoy or get to a grocery store or walk to a commercial area. So we did see transportation desires continue even with this survey after the pandemic. And then in terms of volumes, to the question about what volumes have done, so we do an annual report called the Traffic Time Index, and where we measure on a grade from A to F of what the system is doing in the peak hours. And so what we saw is we were hovering around a C minus in pre-pandemic. Once the pandemic, it shot way up to an A. When everyone was staying home, and you saw it driving around, it was very easy to get just about anywhere you wanted to go. That has crept through the Bs and is approaching the C. So we're coming back very quickly back to the congestion levels of where we were pre-pandemic. There's a lot of reason for that. There's a lot of different jobs that do still require in-person, as well as we're seeing a lot of the e-commerce has picked up. So more of the traffic has transitioned from single occupancy vehicles to more Amazon delivery, things like that.
I wanted to make a comment about what you said about real estate and the cost of real estate for expanding roadways. And it's very true. You start finding businesses along major thoroughfares to add a general purpose lane, it costs money. But it's going to cost the same amount of money to buy the land to build a BRT lane. And the only vehicles that can use that are the rapid transit. So the people that are using the general purpose lanes will see no increase in their mobility at all. So you'll spend the money but only the buses can use the lane. And I think we need to be aware of that's the downfall of BRT as I see it.
Has there been any look into that? Can you provide us with the profiles of the different people and some quantitative measures about how our quality of life is going to change, maybe by area? You know, how much is my life going to get better by 2 more cents of sales tax?
This is not a both referendum or going before the voters right now, so I wouldn't say 2%. In terms of overall, the analysis that's been done has been more network level of looking at what the demands on the system will be and then what projects are off of that. I don't have all of that in front of me, but it's a lot of what would be part of any education of a specific referendum of what quantitatively is the difference between the network today, the network if we didn't do anything, and then the network with the projects that are proposed. Any final burning questions? We'll also hang around in the back, just to make sure.
Yes, I was wondering because for House Bill 930, it said that with over the 30 years, we might be eligible for like government grants because we show credibility per se that we're committed to like transit. Is that like, I know it's not like a guarantee, but I was wondering like if we went through with 930, would we be expecting the government grants, or would those just be like, oh, hey, we got them, now we have the extra money to do more things, or would be dependent on that?
And so we did see with the infrastructure bill and the funding that's coming out of DC that they're looking for those governments that are prepared to have funds to partner with them. And that's the model of the grants that we're seeing out there. And really that's been the case with FTA. Which is the Federal Transit Administration. And so what we have done is set aside funds to be able to leverage those federal funds to make sure that we're taking a dollar and turning it into as many more dollars as we can from other sources. And so we'll take one last question, and then we'll hang out in the back.
I just had a question on the climate impact for these transit and bus systems that are going to be made.
Sure. So in terms of climate impact, I would of the transit system that's being proposed, so a big piece of that is looking at technology, and that's not just technology to be able to call for a ride or know when the bus will be here and how long it'll take you to get to where you're going, but also a piece of that will be looking at emerging technologies. I came prior to here, I was in Athens, Clarke County, where the university had bought some electric buses. So making sure that we're up to date, not just on the technology when it comes to connected vehicles or autonomous vehicles, but also that third one that we talked about of electric vehicles. So like I said, we'll hang out, make sure we'll answer any questions that y'all have. Again, I'll say it one last time, cobbmsplost.org. Nope, I'll say it one more time, cobbmsplost.org. Please go on. We want to hear from you. Feel free to share that out to your neighbors. Make sure they take that survey. Thank you so much for coming. We'll hang out.